First question we have here is, does the change in heart precedes the changes in the brain, like producing endorphins, etc., or vice versa?
The heart and the brain have a very compelling reciprocal relationship. So when we ask ourselves which came first, chicken or egg, they can both initiate a transformation. If you shift your thinking and that changes your feeling, it will change your heart rhythm. However, the electromagnetic influence of the heart is several thousand times greater than the electromagnetic influence of the brain. So one way that I compare this is that if changing the way you're thinking about things sometimes feels like calling radio stations, asking them to change the lyrics of all the songs. But if you pause for a moment of gratitude or compassionate care, it's like changing the station you're listening to. And the brain entrains to that change in the heart rhythm. So it becomes a leveraged way that we can quickly and efficiently self-regulate, not just the brain, but the whole system.
So as far as we know, it all starts with the brain. And heart doesn't have its own way to respond. The heart responds in a couple of ways. One is if there's change in the blood flow, if there are some chemicals in the blood that the heart is sensitive to, as well as the cardiac nerve. But most of the cardiac nerve is driven by autonomic nerves that comes from the heart plexus, and that is also driven by the brain because so there are a couple of different circuits going on. Some circuits we know, some circuits we don't know. So most of the emotional circuits comes from the amygdala, hypothalamus, and goes to different organs, including the heart. And there's also the autonomic nervous system, which comes down. There's a central nerve called the vagus nerve, which affects the heart. There is a belief, because we don't know the actual pathway, that some of the sudden cardiac death could be because of AFib, VT or VFib, or something called PEA, because of massive autonomic nerve sort of barrage or cascade of autonomic nerve discharge, causing the heart to completely stop. And some people believe it has not been proved. There could be a set of nerves coming from the frontal lobe, which is our deciding emotion and other centers that goes to the heart. So long story short, as far as science is concerned, there is no way heart can pick up anything of its own. Heart can pick up things based on inputs either through the blood or through the nerve or through the chemicals for which the heart has got receptors. That's what the scientific belief is. But having to what Ms. Sheva Kar said is the science is still pretty, or shall I say, I don't even call it infancy. I'd call it.
We actually do have about 2,000 plus peer-reviewed evidence-based papers in our research library. So I will put those in the chat in case the audience would enjoy looking at the research itself, which I find very exciting and compelling.
If I may add a little bit to that, when somebody has a heart attack, what's the relation between health and the heart rate? There are multiple aspects to that. Somebody has a heart attack, we give a medicine called a beta blocker. What beta blocker does is it attenuates the effect of sympathetic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is composed of two different things. One is sympathetic and one is parasympathetic. The vagus nerve comes in the parasympathetic axis, and the flight or flight hormones, the catecholamines, the stress, like somebody argues, right? What happens? The catecholamine surge happens. Any stressful situation, catecholamines get released. So the sympathetic system is exacerbated in that situation, any stress. So what the beta blocker does is it attenuates the effect of the sympathetic system on the heart and controls the heart rate. So we target actually a heart rate of less than 60 when somebody has a heart attack. That's how we titrate up the beta blockers, the metoprolol and things like that. Right? So there's another entity called a broken heart syndrome. When somebody, 60s, more so in women, when there is a sudden intense life changes happens, like their loved one or spouse or somebody dies, the intense sympathetic surge acts on the heart muscle to an extent that the heart muscle actually paralyzes in particular portions of the heart. And that causes heart attack, but there are no blockages. To give you another aspect on the heart rate thing, if it weren't for a catecholamine control on our system, in humans, our heart rate would be around 110 at rest. That's what our heart rate will be, in a resting situation. But what drives it lower than that is the constant catecholamine control on the parasympathetic axis of the autonomic nervous system. Another aspect to that, like if you go back to animals, just give you an example, the longest surviving animals have lowest heart rate that we know of. An elephant has a heart rate of barely 40. It lives a long time. An ant has a heart rate of 110. It doesn't live a long time, very short lifespan. So if you extrapolate that findings into the science and what we do on a regular basis to lower the heart rate, impacts a huge lot on the survival and the longevity people will have after a heart attack.
I just want to reiterate that and confirm that there's a very compelling paper that was published showing an inverse relationship between longevity and heart rate,
Right.
meaning species that have a more rapid heart rate die proportionately earlier. And so this simple technique, like mindfulness, yoga, the quick coherence technique that we did, that can help you self-regulate and lower your heart rate to support that parasympathetic function of lowering that 110 beat per minute baseline of a disinnervated heart, is really important, and especially important if you have diabetes, because we talk about peripheral neuropathy in diabetic patients as, losing sensation in your feet, for example, or your limbs. What most people aren't aware of is one of the first nerves to lose innervation and become neuropathic in diabetes are the nerves that innervate the heart. And then you get tachycardia, which means rapid heartbeat, can be one of the early ways that we actually receive a warning that there's a blood sugar problem. And so anything you do to self-regulate that, and to your point, reduce your own heart rate, which is why we showed those slides, is incredibly self-empowering to reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease.
I have 3 questions. Here's the first questions. There are 3 wonderful experts, one who's an electrophysiologist, second one is an interventional cardiologist, third one is a tool for HR variability, which can also work with Ayurvedic pulse diagnosis. As a seeker, how can one use all these 3 to prevent heart disease and hopefully not ever need to see the interventionist?
So what happens is that when you practice yoga with all the aspect, mindfulness, meditation, with passage of time, you will change your HRV, but HRV is just one of the multiple things that changes. And as I said, a lot of inflammatory parameters go off. The brain itself changes. There's a neuroplasticity of the brain. The wave changes inside the brain. As you see, there's a study by a bunch of people which shows people with over 20,000 hours of meditation, they develop gamma waves inside their brain. So what happens is that the whole body is in consonance, you see. And that consonance comes from multiple things. One is emotional well-being, your emotional well-being. And that emotional well-being is not what you as a human being is thinking, but what you as an organism is thinking. So if you as an organism think that you're not in a well-being state, then there will be a problem, and that problem can come from multiple levels. So long story short, practicing things like yoga, meditation, mindfulness sort of resets by working at multiple levels. At the brain level, there is neuroplasticity. In the endocrine level, there are changes of hormones like noradrenaline and all, they are less produced. There's a hormone called DIA, which sort of It's a longevity hormone. Lesser DIAs you have, the more chance you'll die early. So it prolongs the amount of DIA. There's been a bunch of studies on that. Similarly, there are changes in genetic expression that is there. And then as I think Sujit was saying, there is changes in autonomic function also with the predominant, and I think Robert and Sheva was saying there's a prominence of parasympathetic discharge over sympathetic discharge, because sympathetic discharge, remember, readies your body for the flight or fight response. So, and unfortunately, that's a primal response that the body has learned. So I am just maybe sitting here and Robert and Shiva is sitting in California. I'm just jealous that Robert is in California. And but the body inside me will still generate the response as if I'm being attacked by a saber-toothed tiger or a T-Rex. The reason is, in 6 million years, this is what the body has learned. So its response is very discrete. But when you do yoga and like say jealousy and all these things, body doesn't really understand very well because the primal response is like this. So that's as what I think Sujit brought out that point, that the fight or flight response. That exactly is what is fight or flight response. And that changes with time when you practice yoga or meditation. And the change can be, as I said, at different levels.
The only thing I would add is, since the question was, how do I avoid needing any of your services? The simple answer would be appreciate all of us and that we exist to support you. And the more you're in a state of gratitude, the less your T-Rex fight, flight, freeze, appease response will be activated, the more your parasympathetic system will get those wonderful catecholamines going that slow your heart rate and release DHEA, and you'll and you know, I practice Ashtanga yoga every day myself. HeartMath just allows me to bring my yoga practice into a traffic jam. So, you know, the more you practice the truth of yoga on your yoga mat and off your yoga mat, the less you'll need any of us.
So true.
I would love to just add about what you were saying earlier about, you know, people who often do yoga only get to the 2%. And any resources that people can find to get the full, you know, soul integration of what the many years of that is for a state change. I mean, that would be amazing. So any resource that you can find to help integrate and meaningfully into your life is going to be a benefit, whatever speaks to you.
Your concept is interesting. Will you please let us know how one can access and what one will need to make use of this HeartMath technology?
So there are a lot of free resources that we make available as a public service. You're in our community. You're in our backyard, and we cherish our mutual support of one another. So we put an email in the chat. Mohan, I don't know if it's possible to share that. Where
yes, I'll share it on the
And we provide complimentary consultations with licensed clinical HeartMath providers to talk with you about your specific condition and what services in the HeartMath service menu would best support your needs.
Answering your question, yes, there is a study. It was published in Circulation by Prabhakar Dorairaj and all, where they compared normal post-MI rehab that happens in Western countries like in America with one using yoga, and they showed that it's not inferior, it does the same job. And that's a great, it's in Circulation. So if you just Google it, you should be getting it. So Prabhakar is the vice president of the Public Health Foundation of India. He and Srinath Reddy, I don't know if you may know him. He was the head of All India Institute of cardiology for over 20 years.
Right.
That's the first study, and it's a great study, which actually showed that, yes, yoga not only performs same or even better, but it's much cheaper. You know, as you know, rehab is an extremely costly device in the US, and most of the insurance only covers partially. They'll cover 10 sessions or 12 sessions, only that much, which sometimes may not be enough. So this is a good study. That's a great question that you asked. So it's there in Circulation that yoga actually is good.
Terrific. So how do you find a scientific yoga practitioner? Is there
So what we try to do is trying to get people to learn yoga therapy. So there are universities in India like SVSA. The vice chancellor is actually the yoga teacher to the Prime Minister of India also. So those universities, they actually teach you clinical yoga therapy, where you get a clinical knowledge, you really understand what clinical yoga is. Because the problem in this country is, number one, most people don't even understand yoga. They think just doing asanas is all about yoga. That's not true. That's only 5% of yoga. You need to do the other parts of yoga to bring out especially the changes in genes, changes in the brain only comes with doing things like pratyahara, dharana, and dhyana and all. So that's how it is. It's not easy because it's not we still don't have a function, like, who's a nurse, who's a physical therapist in this country, very well defined. Unfortunately for yoga, it's still not well defined, but there are a bunch of people who are trying to do it. I was part of a conference with United Nations who are trying to set up standard along with WHO, yoga as a clinical therapist, because say people like Sujit or me, we have a degree. So I may not be the best in the world. I may not be the worst in the world in America. Or you, as a physician, we have a sort of a line between worse than which we cannot do. We can't even get better because that'll become experimental therapy. But that line is not defined for yoga, clinical yoga. So there are people who are trying to do it, but unfortunately, there's not an answer immediately.
I think she would be very open to this conversation and the very grounded need to combine science and yoga to give it also more credibility to a younger population that's become more scientifically skeptical of older ancient wisdom.
True.